Where were you on October 31st, 2014? Think about it. Where were you on that day, the last day of October 2014? Now, on that day, wherever you were, whatever you're doing, something big was happening in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Something massive was happening. On that day, the last day of October 2014, Traoré became president of Burkina Faso. He became the head of state of Burkina Faso. Now that's 10 years ago. So maybe you're wondering, what am I talking about? That's what we're going to delve into. But remember that on that day, the last day of October 31st, 2014, Traoré became president of Burkina Faso. However, the following day, November 1st, 2014, after only 24 hours, Traoré ceased being head of state of Burkina Faso. What am I talking about? This is not fiction. We're going to get into that, and through that, we are going to learn something very powerful in today's episode. My name is DJ Bokali. Welcome to African Awakening. This is the Pan-African show that is mobilizing Africans in the motherland and across the world, the African diaspora, all 2 billion of us, right here in Africa, in the Americas, in Europe, all over the world. This is the Pan-African show that is mobilizing Africans to awaken, to unite, and to transform Africa. Now, I was not talking about Ibrahim Traoré, but I was talking about Honoré Traoré. Who was this guy? What was he doing? What was he up to? And why did he become president for only one day? You got that right. This guy, Honoré Traoré, he broke the record of being Africa's shortest serving head of state when he was president for a single day from October 31st to November 1st, and then he ceased being head of state. Now, this episode is not about Honoré Traoré. It is about Ibrahim Traoré. But we're not going to look at the current Ibrahim Traoré, President Ibrahim Traoré. Rather, we are going to look at citizen and soldier Ibrahim Traoré. If you want to look at some of the policies that the President Ibrahim Traoré has enacted today, feel free to go and look at the interview that I did with Lynn on the LNN show. You'll find the link below. We went very deeply into some of his current policies as president. So today, I'm not going to talk about the 37-year-old who is president, but I am going to talk about Ibrahim Traoré, the child. I'm going to talk about Ibrahim Traoré, the teenager. I'm going to talk about Ibrahim Traoré in his 20s, and I'm going to talk about Ibrahim Traoré in his early 30s before he became president. It is so important to understand that Ibrahim Traoré, because when you understand how an ordinary Burkinabe child, an ordinary Burkinabe teenager, an ordinary Burkinabe young adult, when you begin to see how ordinary he was, yet simmering deep within him was that resolve that has turned him into the transformative leader that he is today. When you understand that an ordinary African can rise to become a consequential, transformative leader, my prayer and my hope is that you will begin to see that even you, ordinary as you are, maybe just a student, maybe just an employed young person, maybe just a housewife, maybe just an African going about your business, forgetting that lying deep within you is the same superpower that Ibrahim Traoré was able to tap into and become the man, the leader that we know today. And that is why I always like to say, when I introduce myself, that Africa is my superpower. That is not just a tagline, but it's the truth. And as you know, the truth will set you free. Once you understand that Africa is indeed your superpower, then hopefully you are going to follow in those footsteps of Ibrahim Traoré and also tap into your superpower. So brace yourself, buckle up, grab your drink. Just buckle up, grab your drink, and let us have a deep dive today into Ibrahim Traoré before he became president of Burkina Faso. Now, remember the other Traoré, because even though he was president for only one day, for only 24 hours, he is very important in our conversation today. Honoré Traoré exemplifies that same attitude that creates the big man syndrome in our political leaders in Africa today. So do not forget that Honoré Traoré, the guy who was president for only 24 hours. But something crazy is that the honor of being the shortest serving head of state doesn't actually belong to him. He's the shortest serving head of state in Africa. But the honor of the shortest serving head of state globally doesn't belong to him. The honor of being the shortest serving president belongs to Pedro Lascurain. He was president, head of state of Mexico for a mere 45 minutes back in 1913. The reason being that he needed to become president so that he can then pave the way for the real leader of the coup in Mexico at the time to become president. So it was just a machination, but still he occupies that honor or dishonor, however you look at it. Now, back to Honoré Traoré and back to Burkina Faso. There's something that I want you to understand about that particular year of 2014. But to understand 2014, we have to go back all the way to 1987. Because once you grasp what created, what birthed Honoré Traoré, and why he then became president for a very short time, for one day, you're going to begin understanding why there were circumstances in Burkina Faso, undercurrents and dynamics in that great African country that then birthed Ibrahim Traoré. At this time, in 2014, Ibrahim Traoré was a 26-year-old soldier. He was a 26-year-old soldier, and he too was observing what was happening in his beloved country. Now, by the time 2014 started, there was a lot of unrest in Burkina Faso. It was the 27th year of Blaise Compaoré's leadership, presidency. Blaise Compaoré, as many of you already know, he became president in a very brutal, diabolic, and evil manner back in 1987 when he orchestrated and engineered, together with France, together with the CIA, when they orchestrated the assassination of the legendary, the great Thomas Sankara. And then, if you want to know how twisted the global geopolitics at the time was and still is even today, despite the fact that he was a mastermind together with that unholy trinity of France and the USA, despite the fact that he was at the very center of that he was a puppet that was being puppeteered by these powers that be in the West, despite the fact that although he didn't pull the trigger that took out Thomas Sankara, he was behind the scenes orchestrating all that. Despite that fact, he was still feted and celebrated as head of state for 27 years. You got that right, 27 years. But the people of Burkina Faso became tired. They became tired of his dictatorial leadership. They became tired of kleptocracy in the name of democracy. And at this juncture, let me just pause to say that even today, in most African countries, there is no democracy. There is instead kleptocracy. The same kind of kleptocracy that was in Burkina Faso at that time in 2014. Kleptocracy is simply when the corrupt ruling elite of a country, led by the president himself or herself, use that power donated to them by the people to steal from the people. That is kleptocracy. And that is what was happening in Burkina Faso. It was so bad that at the height of this kleptocracy, Blaise Compaoré would take the hard-earned dollars of the Burkinabe people and he would steal this money, he would then donate it to French politicians. He famously did this with Jacques Chirac, not once but severally. It was their way of buying influence of the French presidency, of the corrupt French political system. And they were doing that through Françafrique, which was a shadowy network of all this corrupt ruling elite in Africa and in France itself to steal from the people of Africa. So Blaise Compaoré on numerous occasions would actually take dollars, he liked doing it in small denominations, to the French ruling elite. And the people of Burkina Faso were tired. They were tired, completely tired. Because in 2014, as had been the case for the 27 years of Blaise Compaoré's presidency, for this entire period, Burkina Faso remained amongst the poorest countries in the world. It remained amongst the poorest countries in the world, and the people were tired. So there were demonstrations all over. In Ouagadougou, across the country, and these demonstrations culminated in Blaise Compaoré fleeing from his own country to the neighboring Côte d'Ivoire because he got the message loud and clear. He got the message that the people were fed up with him. And so today, wherever there are demonstrations in Africa today in 2025, when the people say that they are fed up with the corrupt ruling elite, just like Blaise Compaoré, a lot of times this corrupt ruling elite behave as if they're invincible, behave as if they're going nowhere. Kenya is a prime example of this, where currently in 2025, there are a lot of demonstrations ongoing. There were the same demonstrations back in 2024. The people of Kenya are saying, They too are tired of the corrupt ruling elite that is upholding kleptocracy, that is stealing from the people. As Kenyans continue to wallow in unemployment, in poverty, in healthcare challenges, the corrupt ruling elite are getting richer and richer. That is what was happening in 2014 in Burkina Faso. But the voice of the people won resoundingly. Now, there's this crazy habit that is there of people who are corrupt stealing from revolutions. They do not instigate these revolutions. They are not part of these revolutions. But because they are more politically organized, because they are an appendage of that power, prevailing political power, they often masquerade as revolutionaries in order to steal from the people's power, from the people's revolution. And that's what the other Traoré, Honoré Traoré, that's exactly what he did. How did he do it? Honoré Traoré was a chief of the army at this particular time. He was as close to Blaise Compaoré as one can be. He was in Blaise Compaoré's inner circle. He was an elitist military chief, but he thought he could steal the people's revolution. He thought he could simply sneak in and become president and claim to be on the side of the people. But they were not buying it. The people are not buying it, starting from the army itself. And this is what happened. So what happened at this time is that a junior military officer, a lieutenant, a guy called Yakuba Zida, he orchestrated a takeover. After only 24 hours, Yakuba Zida, with the support of the military, at least a large section of the military, he said that there is no way Honoré Traoré, close as he was to Blaise Compaoré, could actually be the leader. And so Yakuba Zida took over. Now, today we're not going to focus on Yakuba Zida. Remember, today is about those two Traorés, Ibrahim and Honoré. At this time that Yakuba Zida then takes over and becomes the head of state in that coup d'etat and replaces his boss, the chief of the army, at that time, Traoré, Ibrahim Traoré, as we have already said, was only 26 years old. He was in the army. He was based in northern Burkina Faso, and he was observing all this. Ibrahim Traoré was observing all this. Ibrahim Traoré, by that time, had even been promoted within the army because he was quite a hard-working soldier located in the north, giving his country the best. At this time, Burkina Faso, the terrorism that currently plagues Burkina Faso had not yet taken root. But there were ramblings of that because by then, in 2014, Muammar Gaddafi had already been taken out by that force that was led by NATO, and Libya was already disintegrating. Remember, the disintegration of Libya is what led to the proliferation of all these jihadists in the entire Sahel region. So there were already rumblings of that insecurity. The jihadists were already regrouping. They had not yet destabilized Burkina Faso like they have today, but they had begun their march. And right there on the front line was Ibrahim Traoré. Now, Ibrahim Traoré had been watching all this. He had been watching all this, and he was deeply perturbed. We do not have any specific records saying that this is what he then did or this is what he said. All we know was that he was a hardworking soldier, a hardworking 26-year-old soldier at that particular time. In the army, as a young soldier, you do not get promoted just like that unless you deserve it, unless you've earned it. So he had earned his promotion at that particular time. And he observed as his namesake took over for a day. He observed as Zida then took over as president of his great country.
J'assume désormais.
It's very important to glimpse Traoré, the young soldier at this time, Ibrahim Traoré, because what was happening to him was that he was becoming formed into Traoré, the president that he is today. That discipline, that sheer focus that was leading to his promotion at that time in 2014 informs the same focus, the same discipline that he's exhibiting today as President Traoré. Thank you very much. As we continue with today's episode, I want to urge you to remember that we are looking at Ibrahim Traoré, the ordinary Burkinabe citizen, so that we can understand that each and every one of the 1.5 billion Africans in the motherland and the nearly 500 million in the diaspora, each of these Africans, society may be looking at you as ordinary, but you need to understand that just like Traoré was an ordinary person at the time, who then became extraordinary because of that sheer resolve, because of that utter belief that Africa can be a better place, you too, so-called ordinary African, can summon the African superpower within you and begin to be an extraordinary African in whichever field that you're in, whatever age that you are. Let me give you proof for that. During this period, Burkina Faso's GDP per capita was a mere about 760 US dollars. Meanwhile, France's per capita at the same period, was roughly $46,000. Do you see the utter gap between those two countries? And these were the things that were bothering Ibrahim Traoré. Which is why, when he was in the University of Ouagadougou a few years earlier, before he joined the army, he actually joined a Marxist student organization. And for a couple of years, Ibrahim Traoré looked deeply into the issue of a classless society. Now, understand this. It was not about ideological conversion to a foreign ideology, but it was about him looking deeper into his own Burkinabe society. He began to see that indeed the ruling elite of his country were getting richer, but the ordinary Burkinabe like him were getting poorer. He began to see that, and it bothered him greatly. Remember, when you're talking about Marxism, Thomas Sankara himself was a student of Marxism. Apart from Thomas Sankara, Samora Machel, the great president of Mozambique, was also a student of Marxism. And so Ibrahim Traoré wanted to understand why the classes in Burkina Faso, on the one hand, you had the extremely rich and extremely small minority, and on the other hand, you had the majority of the Burkinabe. who are very poor, barely getting by. You've got to understand his relationship with the sheer gap in his society to understand the man that he later became. Now, at this juncture, we need to suggest something very radical. Today's Africa cannot continue being an Africa where there are two classes of the extremely rich, emboldened and fueled by the corrupt resources that they steal from the people, and the rest of the Africans. And that is what made Ibrahim Traoré mad in his university years. And we will get deeper into that. I mention it now so that you can understand that the 26-year-old soldier who saw a president who had stolen from the people for 27 years, the 26-year-old Ibrahim Traoré who witnessed that at the same time that he was being promoted within the army despite his tender age, we've got to understand what was going on in his mind. So when we look at the fact that as a university student in his early 20s, he was deeply bothered by this gap in his society, so much so that he became active in this Marxist student organization, you begin to see that even right there in the army, he still had that singular focus of ensuring that this class in his society, this gap in the Burkinabe society at the time, can begin to reduce as the ordinary poorer Burkinabe become much more empowered, much more emboldened.